A raven lands on a cliff in Norway. This is around the year 890. A woman is there. She isn't just any woman. She is a Valkyrie. She looks at the raven, its feathers dark against the gray stone. She asks it a simple question: where have you come from? The raven speaks. It tells her of battle. It tells her of King Harald Fairhair, the king who is forcing all of Norway under his rule. The raven says it has followed Harald since it was an egg. It knows him. It knows his warriors. The Valkyrie is curious. She asks about these men. What do they do? How do they live? The raven describes the court. It talks about the poets, the skalds. They are rewarded with gold rings from Harald's arm. It talks about the entertainers, the jesters who perform for the king. It talks about the warriors, not just any warriors. It mentions the Ulfhednar, the wolfcoats, men who wear wolf pelts in battle. They carry blood-stained shields. The raven has seen them fight. It has seen the aftermath. This whole conversation is a poem. It's called Hrafsmal, or the Raven's Speech. It was written by a skald named Thorbjorn Hornklofi. He was one of Harald's own court poets. He saw these things himself. This isn't a story written 300 years later by an Icelander looking back. This is a snapshot. A real-time report from one of the most important periods in Viking history. The Valkyrie and the Raven are just the framing device. The real information is what they talk about. The daily life of a king's warband, the rewards, the entertainment, the brutal nature of the fighters. It's a contemporary source, and it's one of the few we have. It whispers a truth. The Viking Age wasn't just a myth. It was real life. It was poets getting paid and warriors wearing wolf skins. The sagas, written centuries later, tried to capture this world. Some are famous, but the hidden ones, the less read ones, often hold the most surprising truths. They show a world far more complex than just raiding and fighting. Number 18, a lawsuit could be won with a joke. The Bandamana saga is unique. It's a comedy. There are no great battles, no tragic heroes. It's about a lawsuit in Iceland around the year 1050. And it shows that the Vikings' most powerful weapon wasn't always an axe. Sometimes it was a sharp mind and a good sense of humor. The story centers on a young man named Odd O'Fageson. Odd is ambitious. He's not from a powerful family, but he wants to make a name for himself. He becomes a successful merchant, he travels, makes good deals, and comes back to Iceland a wealthy man. He buys land and settles down, but his success makes the local chieftains nervous. They don't like seeing a newcomer rise so quickly. A problem arises. Odd's foreman, who manages his farm while he's away, is careless. Some of Odd's sheep go missing and wander onto a neighbor's land. This leads to a dispute. It's a small thing, but the chieftains see their chance. 8 of them band together. They form a confederacy, a band of men to sue Odd. They plan to confiscate all his property and ruin him. They see an easy victory. It's 8 powerful chieftains against 1 young merchant. The case goes to the Althing, the annual Icelandic assembly. This was the center of law and politics. Everything looks bad for Odd. The chieftains are confident. They have the power, the influence, but Odd has his father, Ofeg. Ofeg is old, clever, and doesn't care much for what powerful people think of him. He decides to help his son. Ofeg doesn't try to fight the chieftains with force. He uses his words. He goes to the Althing looking like a shabby old man. He approaches each of the 8 chieftains one by one. He flatters them. He tells each one that he is clearly the most important, the leader of the group. He asks them what their share of Odd's property will be. He makes them greedy. He makes them suspicious of each other. Each chieftain, starts to think he deserves more than the others. Their alliance begins to crack. Then Ofeg plays his masterstroke. He goes before the court. He tells a story. He talks about his own life, his own animals. He speaks in a folksy, rambling way. The judges and the audience are amused. He seems like a harmless old character. He then turns to the case. He doesn't argue the legal points. Instead, he makes the entire lawsuit sound ridiculous. He makes the powerful chieftains look like greedy fools, ganging up on a young man over a few lost sheep. He uses wit and sarcasm. He points out their arrogance. The mood at the Althing shifts. People start to laugh at the chieftains. The powerful men are embarrassed. Their case, which seemed so strong, now looks petty. Ophig has completely undermined their authority, not with threats, but with humor. The judges, seeing the chieftains discredited and their alliance in tatters, rule in Odd's favor. The case is thrown out. The Bandamanna saga tells us something vital about Icelandic society. It was a society obsessed with law. The Althing was the main event of the year, but law was not just a set of rigid rules, it was a performance. Public opinion mattered. A clever speaker could sway the court. Reputation and honor were everything. By making the chieftains a laughingstock, Ophig destroyed their honor more effectively than any weapon could. This saga shows a world where legal loopholes, clever arguments, and public relations were as important as family connections and military strength. It reveals a surprisingly sophisticated and strategic side of Viking Age culture. Number 17, friendship required a formal, bloody oath. The Fossbreidra saga, the saga of the Sworn Brothers, explores the idea of loyalty. It's about two men, Thorgeir Havarsson and Thormod Bursasson. They live in the West Fjords of Iceland in the early 11th century. They are not related by blood, but they decide to become brothers through a formal ritual. This wasn't just a promise, it was a serious binding act. The saga describes the ceremony. The two men cut a strip of turf from the ground. They lift it up, leaving an arch of earth supported by a spear. This created a symbolic doorway. Under this arch, they let their blood mingle in the raw earth. They swore an oath. The oath was simple and absolute. Whoever lived longer would avenge the other's death. This was a blood brotherhood, a Fossbreidra lag. It made them family. Their lives were now tied together by this promise. The two men were very different. Thorgeir was a natural killer. He was tough, relentless, and saw violence as the solution to most problems. The saga says he would kill a man with as little thought as he would kill a cow. Thormod was different. He was a poet, a skald. He was known as Thormod Coalbrow's Skald because he had written a poem about a woman with dark eyebrows. He was thoughtful and sensitive, but also a skilled warrior when he needed to be. Their oath is tested. Thorgeir's aggressive nature leads him into many conflicts. He kills several men and eventually gets himself killed. Now the oath falls upon Thormod. Thormod the poet must become Thormod the Avenger. His life is no longer his own. He is bound by the promise he made under that arch of turf. Thormod's quest for vengeance takes him far from Iceland. He travels to Greenland, then to Norway. He joins the court of King Olaf II, who was later known as Saint Olaf. Thormod becomes one of the king's most trusted warriors, but he never forgets his oath. He spends years hunting for the man who killed Thorgeir. He is patient, he waits for his opportunity. The climax of his story comes at the Battle of Stiklestad in 1030. This was a real historical battle where King Olaf was killed. Thormod fights bravely beside his king. In the midst of the chaos, he finally finds his sworn brother's killer and avenges Thorgeir. But Thormod is also mortally wounded. The saga gives a detailed account of his final moments. He walks away from the battle, pulls an arrow from his own chest, and calmly composes one last poem before he dies. The Fossbreidra saga shows that personal relationships in this society could be formalized to the highest degree. Friendship wasn't just a casual feeling, it could be a pact sealed in blood that overrode all other obligations. This oath was more important than personal safety, more important than living a peaceful life. It was a matter of honor. The story also shows the dual nature of the ideal Viking man. He could be both a sensitive poet and a relentless warrior. Thormod embodied this. He was a man of words and a man of action. His entire life after Thorgeir's death was defined by a promise made years before, a testament to the profound weight of an oath in the Norse world. Number 16, the dead did not always rest in peace. The Erbygja saga is a sprawling history of the people living on the Snæfellsnes Peninsula in western Iceland. It covers several generations from the first settlement in the late 9th century to the early 11th century. It's not about one single hero, it's about a community, and that community had a serious problem with ghosts. This saga is one of our best sources for understanding Norse beliefs about the supernatural. For the people in this story, the dead were not gone. They were a constant physical presence if a person was not buried correctly, or if they had unfinished business, they could walk again. And they were not friendly spirits. They were Draugr, corporeal undead. One of the most famous episodes involves a man named Thorolf Haltfoot. Thorolf was a difficult man in life. He was greedy, quarrelsome, and unpopular. When he died, he was buried in a mound near his farm. But he didn't stay there. Soon after his death, he began to haunt the area. He walked the countryside, causing cattle to go mad and people to disappear. He was a physical threat. He could be seen from miles away, a huge, menacing figure. The haunting got so bad that no one could live near his burial mound. The farm was abandoned. The problem fell to Thorolf's son, Arnkell. Arnkell had to deal with his own dead father, and he gathered some men, dug up the mound, and found Thorolf's body. The body was undecayed and looked evil. Arnkell moved the body to a more remote location and buried it again, hoping that would solve the problem. And it didn't. Thorolf continued to haunt the land. The saga describes how the community finally dealt with him. They had to dig him up a second time. This time they took no chances. They burned the body to ashes. This was the only sure way to stop a Draugr. The story shows a practical, almost procedural approach to dealing with the supernatural. There were rules, there were methods. This wasn't just vague superstition, it was a real problem that required a community response. Another haunting in the saga is even more dramatic. It takes place at a farm called Froda. After a group of men drown at sea, their ghosts return to the farm. They show up soaking wet and sit by the fire every evening. They take the places of the living. More people at the farm get sick and die. Their ghosts then join the others by the fire. The farmhouse becomes crowded with the dead. The owner of the farm, a woman named Thurid, is at a loss. The problem is finally solved with a legal ritual. A door court is convened right there in the farmhouse. The ghosts are formally charged with trespassing. They are sued. One by one, as their names are called, the ghosts stand up and leave, admitting the charge is valid. They recognize the authority of the law, even in death. The Erbygja saga reveals a worldview where the line between the living and the dead was thin. The supernatural was not a separate realm, it was part of daily life, and it was governed by the same principles as the world of the living. A ghost could be stopped with fire. A group of ghosts could be evicted with a lawsuit. It shows a society that used its most powerful tools, law, and community action to confront the fears of the unknown. Number 15, a skald's love life was incredibly complicated. Cormac's saga is a love story, but it's not a happy one. It follows the life of Cormacr Ogmundarson, a famous Icelandic skald from the mid-10th century. The saga is filled with his poetry, verses he composed for the woman he loved, Steingrdr, Thorkel's daughter. The story tells us that being a great poet didn't guarantee success in love. In fact, it might have just made things worse. Cormacr meets Steingrdr and falls for her instantly. He composes beautiful, complex poems for her. These poems, which are integrated into the saga text, are real examples of skaldic poetry. They are full of kennings, metaphorical phrases, and heady poetic synonyms. They are technical masterpieces. They show Cormacr's skill and his deep feelings. Steingrdr is impressed. Her family agrees to a marriage. Everything seems perfect. But then, it all goes wrong. On the day he is supposed to ride to his wedding, Cormacr gets distracted. He gets into a minor squabble with some other men and forgets the time. He shows up late. Steingrdr's family is insulted. They call off the wedding. This one simple mistake, a moment of distraction, costs him everything. Steingirder ends up marrying another man named Bersi. Cormaker is devastated, but he doesn't give up. For the rest of his life, he pursues her. He can't let her go. He challenges Bersi to a duel, a Holmganga. The rules of this formal duel were very specific. It was fought on a special cloak or hide, and there were strict regulations. Cormaker and Bersi fight, but the duel is inconclusive. The saga suggests that Cormaker's failure is not just bad luck. It might be the result of a curse. A sorceress, a sidekona, had cursed him early on, saying he would never have Steingirder. This introduces the theme of fate. Was Cormaker's tragic love life his own fault, or was he a victim of forces beyond his control? The saga leaves it open. Even after Steingirder marries a second time, Cormaker continues to follow her. He travels abroad, he becomes a Viking, a successful warrior, but he's never happy. He keeps composing poems about her. He has brief encounters with her over the years, but they can never be together. He has chances to move on, but he can't. His love for her becomes an obsession that defines his whole life. He dies as a Viking in a raid in Scotland. His last thoughts are of Steingirder. His story is a tragedy. He was a brilliant poet, a brave warrior, but he was a failure in the one thing that mattered most to him. Cormac's saga gives us a different view of the Viking Age man. Cormaker is not a stoic, emotionless warrior. He is driven by intense, overwhelming passion. His poetry is his outlet. The saga shows the immense cultural importance of skalds. They were the rock stars of their day. Their words had power. But it also shows that artistic talent and fame were no shield against personal failure and heartbreak. It's a story about how a single moment of bad judgment can echo through a lifetime, and how love can become a destructive, all-consuming force. It reminds us that behind the helmets and shields were complex human beings, capable of deep and lasting sorrow. Number 14, survival in Greenland was a nightmare. Most people know about Eric the Red. They know he founded the Norse settlement in Greenland around 985. The sagas that tell this story, like the saga of the Greenlanders and Eric the Red saga, often focus on the discovery and the famous voyages to Vinland. But there is another saga, a lesser-known one, that tells a much darker story. The Floamana saga, the saga of the people of Floy, shows what life was really like for some of the first settlers. It was not a grand adventure, it was a brutal fight for survival. The main character is Thorgils Orabinstu. He is an Icelandic chieftain who decides to move his entire household to Greenland. He is inspired by a dream. In the dream, a man tells him to go to Greenland, where he will find honor. Thorgils is a Christian, but he still puts faith in this pagan-style dream. This mix of beliefs is a key part of the story. The journey to Greenland is a disaster. The ship is blown off course and becomes trapped in the ice. They are forced to spend the winter in a desolate, frozen bay far from the established Norse settlements. They are not prepared. They build crude shelters. Food quickly runs out. People start to get sick and die. Thorgils' own wife dies. The survivors are starving and desperate. The saga describes the psychological toll of their situation. The endless darkness of the Arctic winter, the constant cold, the fear. Thorgils has to be the leader, holding his small, desperate group together. He has to hunt for seals on the ice to feed them. He has to keep their spirits up. The story takes a supernatural turn. Thorgils' pagan past and Christian present collide. One of his men dies and becomes a draugr, a walking corpse that terrorizes their camp. Thorgils has to fight it. He also has a dream vision of the god Thor, who offers him help in exchange for a return to the old ways. Thorgils refuses. He puts his faith in his new god, but his world is still one where the old gods and monsters feel very real. He prays, but he also has to physically battle the undead. After an incredible ordeal lasting more than a year, Thorgils and the few survivors are finally rescued. They reach the main Norse settlement, but they have lost almost everything. You know, the saga doesn't end there. Thorgils' life continues to be one of hardship. He faces political conflicts, family tragedies, and more difficult journeys. The Flomana saga is a corrective to the more heroic tales of exploration. It shows the reality of the Greenland experiment. It was a marginal existence on the very edge of the world. A single bad winter, a single failed hunt could mean death for an entire family. It also shows the complex religious landscape of the time. Thorgils was a Christian, but he lived in a world shaped by centuries of pagan belief. Dreams, gods, and monsters were part of his reality. His faith was not a simple, abstract thing. It was something he had to hold on to while fighting for his life against starvation, cold, and what he believed to be very real monsters. This saga tells the forgotten truth of the colonists who didn't find glory, but only a long, hard struggle to stay alive. Number 13 Revenge could take a lifetime. The saga of Havardur of Isafjordur is a story about old age and vengeance. It's set in the rugged Westfjords of Iceland. The main character, Havardur, is not a young warrior in his prime. When the story begins, he is an old man. He is a former Viking, but his fighting days are long over. He is respected, but he is seen as a man of the past. Havardur's son, Bjorn, is killed by a powerful and arrogant chieftain named Thorbjorn. Thorbjorn is a bully. He thinks he can get away with anything, and for a while he does. He has connections, he has wealth. He offers Havardur a small amount of compensation money for his son's death, as was the custom, but the amount is insulting. It's a public statement that his son's life was worth very little. Havardur is consumed by grief. He is so distraught that he takes to his bed. He doesn't eat, he doesn't speak. He lies there for an entire year. His wife, Bjargi, tries to rouse him, but nothing works. He has lost his will to live. The community sees him as a broken man. His honor is gone. He has failed to get proper justice for his son. Then, one day, his wife, Bjargi, has had enough. She goes to him, she doesn't comfort him, she scolds him. She tells him he is a disgrace. She reminds him of the great warrior he used to be. She says it would be better to die fighting for his son's honor than to waste away in bed. Her words are harsh, but they work. They shame him back to life. A fire is lit in the old man. Havardur gets out of bed. He is physically weak, but his spirit is renewed. He gathers his old allies, other men who are past their prime but still remember the old ways of honor. He also gets help from his son-in-law, a clever strategist. Together, they begin to plot their revenge against Thorbjorn. The saga shows their careful planning. They don't rush in, they use stealth and strategy. They are old, so they have to fight smart. They use their knowledge of the local landscape, the fjords and mountains they have known their whole lives. They set ambushes, they pick their moment. The climax is a confrontation where Havardur and his small band of old men attack Thorbjorn and his followers. Despite being outnumbered and older, they succeed. Havardur kills Thorbjorn, finally avenging his son. He reclaims his honor. He is no longer the broken old man in his bed. He is Havardur, the warrior again. This saga tells us something important about the Norse concept of honor. It wasn't just for the young. It was a lifelong obligation. Even in old age, a man was expected to defend his family's name. The story also gives a compelling portrait of a marriage. Bjargi is not a passive character. She is the catalyst. Her sharp words are what turn the story around. She is the keeper of her husband's honor, and she forces him to act. The saga of Havardur of Isafjordur is a reminder that the Viking spirit was not just about youthful strength. It was also about enduring will, the wisdom of age, and the refusal to let an injustice stand, no matter how long it took. For number 12, a feud was not just a fight, it was a social process. The saga of the people of Vopnafjordur, or Vapnfridinga saga, is a short, tightly written story about a local feud in eastern Iceland. It doesn't involve famous kings or far-flung voyages. It's about two families, neighbors, and how a friendship turns into a bitter, multi-generational conflict. It provides a detailed look at how feuds actually worked in Icelandic society. The main characters are Broad Helgi and Geitir, and they are chieftains in the same district. They are also related and are supposed to be allies. For a time, they are, but their personalities are different. Helgi is aggressive and ambitious. Geitir is more steady and cautious. Their relationship starts to sour over a series of disputes. Small things, a land deal, a disagreement over a stray horse. These minor conflicts escalate. The saga shows that a feud wasn't a constant state of war, it was a slow burn. There would be an incident, followed by a period of tension. Then there would be an attempt at a settlement, often at the local assembly. A compensation payment might be arranged, but if one party felt the settlement was unfair, the anger would continue to simmer. And it was a cycle of provocation, retaliation, and failed negotiation. The conflict between Helgi and Geitir gets worse. Helgi's ambition grows. He starts to push his authority in ways that undermine Geitir. It becomes a struggle for local dominance. The personal friendship is completely destroyed. It is replaced by a cold, formal rivalry. Finally, it erupts into violence. Helgi ambushes and kills Geitir, but killing the main rival doesn't end the feud. It just passes it to the next generation. Now, it is Geitir's son, Thorkel, who has the obligation to seek revenge. The second half of the saga is about Thorkel's quest to avenge his father. Thorkel is a different kind of man. He is a successful merchant, well-traveled and respected. He is not a natural troublemaker like Helgi, but the duty is his. Thorkel is patient, he waits for years, he builds his alliances, he waits for the right moment to strike. The saga carefully lays out the social and political maneuvering involved. Thorkel needs the support of other chieftains. He needs public opinion on his side. Vengeance was not just a private act of violence, it had to be seen as justified by the community. Eventually, Thorkel gets his revenge, he corners Helgi and kills him. But even this is not the end. The feud could continue, with Helgi's sons now obligated to avenge him. However, the saga shows a way out. After Thorkel's vengeance, the other chieftains of the region step in. They mediate a final settlement, they decide that enough blood has been shed, a lasting peace is negotiated. The cycle is finally broken. The Vapfordinga saga demonstrates that a feud was a structured social phenomenon. It had a grammar. It involved legal challenges, public posturing, strategic violence, and eventually community-led resolution. It wasn't just mindless killing. It was a dangerous and destructive process for settling disputes over honor, property, and power in a society that lacked a central government or police force. It was a way for society to regulate itself, even if the process was often bloody and tragic. Number 11, women's voices shaped the fate of men. The Laxdæla saga is one of the great Icelandic sagas. It's a long, sweeping story of a powerful family in the Laxardal Valley over many generations. While it's more famous than some of the other sagas on this list, it contains a profound truth about the role of women. In a world that seems dominated by male warriors and chieftains, the women of Laxdæla saga are the real driving force of the story. Their desires, their pride, and their words determine the course of events. The central character of the saga is Gudrun Osvífursdóttir. She is described as the most beautiful woman ever born in Iceland. She is also intelligent, proud, and strong-willed. As a young woman, she has a series of prophetic dreams. She tells them to a wise man who interprets them. The dreams predict she will have 4 husbands, and her life will be full of love and loss. The story revolves around a love triangle. Gudrun is in love with a man named Kjartan Ólafsson. He is handsome, talented, a great warrior, and poet. They are the perfect match, but Kjartan decides to travel to Norway for a few years to make a name for himself. Before he leaves, they agree to wait for each other. While Kjartan is in Norway, his cousin and sworn brother Bolli Thorleiksson stays in Iceland. Bolli is also a fine man, but he has always lived in Kjartan's shadow. He is also in love with Gudrun. False rumors reach Iceland that Kjartan has found a new love in Norway, Gudrun is hurt and her pride is wounded. Bali's family pressures him to act. He proposes to Gudrun, feeling abandoned by Kjartan. She accepts. When Kjartan returns to Iceland, he is furious to find that the love of his life has married his best friend. The friendship between the two men is shattered. A bitter feud begins. It escalates through a series of petty, spiteful acts. Kjartan humiliates Boli publicly. Boli feels his honor is at stake. This is where Gudrun's influence becomes critical. She constantly pushes Boli to stand up to Kjartan. She feels slighted by Kjartan, and she wants her husband to defend her honor. She goads him. She tells him he is a coward if he lets Kjartan continue to insult them. Her words are relentless. Finally, she pushes him too far. Bali and his brothers ambush Kjartan. Bali deals the final blow, killing his cousin and sworn brother. Kjartan dies in Boli's arms. The tragedy doesn't end there. Kjartan's family is now bound to seek revenge. They eventually kill Bali. Gudrun is left a widow. In her old age, she becomes a nun, the first in Iceland. Her son asks her once which man she loved the most. She replies with a famous, enigmatic line, "To him I was worst whom I loved the most." She meant Kjartan. Her pride, hurt by his absence, had led her to marry Boli and set in motion the chain of events that destroyed both men. Laxdæla saga shows that women in this society, while they couldn't wield a sword in battle or speak at the Althing, had immense power. They operated in the domestic sphere, but their influence was profound through marriage alliances, through raising their sons, and through the power of their words, goading, shaming, praising. They could incite feuds, drive men to action, and shape the destiny of their families for generations. Gudrun's story is a powerful illustration of this hidden female agency in the Viking world. Number 10, an outlaw was not a common criminal. Grettis saga, the saga of Grettir the Strong, is the life story of one of Iceland's most famous outlaws. Grettir Asmundarsson lived in the early 11th century. The saga portrays him as the strongest man in Iceland, but he is also cursed with bad luck. He is hot-tempered, rebellious, and finds himself on the wrong side of the law. He is declared a full outlaw, the most severe punishment in Icelandic society. Being an outlaw wasn't just about being a wanted criminal. It was a complete social and legal death. An outlaw had no rights. He could be killed by anyone without penalty. It was illegal for anyone to give him food, shelter, or any kind of help. His property was confiscated. He was cast out from the community of men, forced to live in the wilderness alone. Grettir spends nearly 20 years as an outlaw. This is a record. No other outlaw in the sagas survived for so long. The saga details his life on the run. He lives in caves and remote huts. He survives by stealing sheep from farmers and fishing in remote lakes. He is constantly hunted. Men try to kill him to gain fame and fortune. He has to fight them off, which only adds to his reputation as a dangerous man. But the saga shows that Grettir is more than just a violent brute. He is a complex character. He is lonely. He longs for human company. He is afraid of the dark, a fear that stems from a fight with a draugr, a walking corpse, early in his career. The draugr, named Glam, lays a curse on him, saying that Grettir will always see Glam's terrifying eyes in the darkness. This fear haunts him for the rest of his life. Despite being outside the law, Grettir sometimes acts heroically. He fights off monsters and protects isolated communities. In one famous episode, he fights a troll-like creature in a cave behind a waterfall to save a farmer's daughter. He is a protector of the people, but he is still an outlaw. The law is inflexible. His good deeds cannot erase his legal status. His long outlawry becomes a kind of legend. People tell stories about him. He becomes a boogeyman to some, a folk hero to others. He is the ultimate outsider, a man living on the absolute margins of society. His only human connections are with his family, who sometimes help him in secret, at great risk to themselves. Grettir's end comes because of sorcery. An enemy uses magic to make him wound himself with his own axe. The wound becomes infected. While he is sick and weak, his enemies find him on his last refuge, a lonely island called Drangi. They kill him, finally ending his long years on the run. Greta's saga provides a deep insight into the concept of outlawry. It was not just a punishment, it was a complete severing of a person from their world. It tested the limits of human endurance. Grettir's story is tragic. He is a man of great gifts, a man who could have been a great hero, but his temper and his bad luck, combined with an unforgiving legal system, forced him into a life of isolation and violence. He represents the individual against society, a man who could not or would not fit in, and paid the ultimate price for it. Number 9, pagan rituals were described in startling detail. The Chalnasinga saga, the saga of the people of Chelarnes, is a smaller, less-known saga, but it contains one of the most detailed descriptions of a pagan temple and its rituals in all of Old Norse literature. It gives us a rare glimpse into the religious practices of the pre-Christian Norse. The saga is set in the district of Chelarnes near modern-day Reykjavik. The central figure in the religious part of the story is a chieftain named Thorgrim Helgason. He is the gadi, or priest, for the local community. His main duty is to maintain a temple dedicated to the god Thor. The saga describes the temple itself. It was a wooden building, it was not a huge cathedral, it was a hall, a hof. Inside there was a special, partitioned-off area similar to a chancel in a church. In this inner sanctum there were statues of the gods. The most important statue was of Thor. He was in the middle, seated in a chariot. The saga says he was decorated with gold and silver. Other gods were arranged on either side of him. In front of the statues was an altar, a stallar. It was made of stone, but sheathed in iron on top. This was where the sacred fire was kept. The fire had to burn continuously. On this altar sat a large silver ring. The saga says this ring was used for swearing all formal oaths. People had to swear on the ring, which had been sanctified by the blood of a sacrificed animal. There was also a large bowl, a hlotboli, which was used to collect the blood from sacrifices. And there was a special twig, a hlatin, which was used to sprinkle the blood on the altar and on the people attending the ceremony. The saga describes the main ritual, the blot or sacrifice. These were held at specific times of the year, like the beginning of winter. People from the whole district would gather at the temple. They brought provisions for a great feast. The main event was the sacrifice of animals, usually horses or oxen. The blood was collected in the bowl. The chieftain, acting as the priest, would then sprinkle the blood around. The meat of the sacrificed animals would then be cooked in large cauldrons in the temple and eaten by everyone in a communal feast. It was a religious event, but it was also a major social gathering. The story's main character, Bui, gets into a conflict with the chieftain Thorgrim. To get his revenge, Bui goes to the temple during a storm. He sets it on fire and burns it to the ground. This was the ultimate act of sacrilege. It was not just an attack on a building, it was an attack on the community's connection to their gods and on the chieftain's authority. The Kjalnesinga saga is invaluable because these kinds of detailed descriptions are extremely rare. Most sagas were written by Christians centuries after the conversion. They were often reluctant to describe pagan practices in detail, or they simply didn't know how they worked. This saga, for whatever reason, preserved a memory of what a temple looked like and what went on inside. It shows that Norse paganism was an organized communal religion with specific rituals, sacred objects, and a defined sacred space. You know, it was not just a collection of myths, it was a living faith. Number 8, settling a new land meant building a society from scratch. The Vatnsdæla saga tells the story of one family, the descendants of a man named Ingemund the Old, who settled the Vatnsdælur Valley in northern Iceland. It's a multi-generational chronicle spanning from the late 9th century to the 11th century. It's not a story of Vikings raiding abroad. It's a story of pioneers building a new life and a new community in an empty land. Ingemund the Old is a nobleman from Norway. He fights for King Harald Fairhair. After the king unifies Norway, Ingemund is content to stay. He has no desire to go to the newly discovered island of Iceland. But a seeress tells him it is his destiny to go there. She tells him a silver figurine he owns dedicated to the god Frey will show him the way. At first, he resists, but circumstances push him to leave. He finally sets sail for Iceland. When he arrives, he has to find the right place to live. The saga describes how he finds the spot predicted by the seeress. He builds his farm, Hof, and becomes the first great chieftain of the valley. The saga then focuses on the practical challenges of being a settler. It's not just about building a house. It's about establishing a new society. Ingemund has to deal with his neighbors. He has to establish laws and customs. He has to manage resources. The saga describes disputes over land, over livestock, over fishing rights. It shows how the first generation of chieftains had to be leaders, judges, and diplomats all at once. They were creating the social fabric of Iceland from nothing. The saga then follows Ingemund's sons, especially Thorstein. The second generation faces different challenges. The land is settled now. The main problems are internal. Feuds with other families, conflicts over honor and inheritance. Thorstein has to navigate these complex social dynamics. He has to uphold his family's honor while also trying to keep the peace in the valley. One of the main themes of the saga is the idea of luck, or Hamingja. This was a kind of spiritual power or good fortune that a family possessed. Ingemund the Old had a great deal of Hamingja. He was a successful and respected leader. The saga suggests that this luck is passed down through the generations. His sons inherit his good qualities. But this luck can also run out. As the family line continues, new challenges arise, and the later generations struggle to live up to the standards set by their ancestor. The Vatnsdæla saga provides a detailed picture of the settlement process. It was a slow, difficult task that took generations. It involved exploration, building, farming, and most importantly, the creation of a stable community with laws and leaders. It shows the transition from the heroic age of the first discoverer to the more complex, socially entangled world of his descendants. The truth it tells is that the Viking Age was not just about leaving, it was also about arriving and building something new that would last. Number 7. The first Europeans in America did not stay. Everyone knows the Vikings reached North America about 500 years before Columbus. The two sagas that tell this story are the Saga of the Greenlanders and Eric the Red's saga. They are sometimes called the Vinland Sagas. They describe the voyages of Leif Erikson and others who sailed west from Greenland around the year 1000. These sagas tell a forgotten truth not just about the discovery, but about why the Vikings failed to establish a permanent colony. The Saga of the Greenlanders gives a more straightforward account. It says Leif Erikson was the first to land in the New World. He found a land of grapes and self-sown wheat, which he named Vinland. He built some large houses known as Leifsbudir Leifsbooths, and spent a winter there before sailing back to Greenland with a cargo of timber and grapes. The archaeological site at Lancey Os Meadows in Newfoundland is widely believed to be this settlement. After Leif, other voyages followed. His brother Thorvald went. He was killed in a skirmish with the native people, whom the Norse called Skrællingar. This was the first major problem. The new land was not empty. It was inhabited by people who were not always friendly and who vastly outnumbered the small Norse expeditions. The most ambitious attempt at colonization was led by an Icelander named Thorfinn Karlsefni. Eric the Red's saga focuses heavily on his story. Karlsefni led a large expedition with several ships, over 160 people, including women and livestock. This was a serious attempt to create a permanent settlement. They stayed in Vinland for about 3 years. The saga describes the birth of Karlsefni's son Snorri, the first European born in the Americas. For a while, things went well. They explored the land, they found good pasture for their animals, They began to trade with the Skrælingr. The Norse offered them milk and red cloth in exchange for furs. The saga notes that the natives were fascinated by the Norsemen's iron weapons, but Karlsefni forbade trading them. But the relationship with the natives soured. A misunderstanding during a trading session led to a fight. The Skrælingr attacked the settlement in force. The Norse were skilled warriors, but they were terrified by the natives' numbers and their strange war cries. The saga mentions a woman, Freydis Eriksdottir, Eric the Red's daughter, who single-handedly rallied the fleeing Norsemen by grabbing a sword, beating her bare chest with it, and screaming at the attackers, scaring them off. Despite winning the battle, the Norse realized their position was untenable. They were too few. They were too far from home. The natives were too numerous and could be hostile. Karlsefni decided to abandon the settlement. They packed up and sailed back to Greenland. The Vinland sagas reveal why the Great Viking expansion reached its limit. The Norse could sail across the Atlantic. They could build a settlement. What they couldn't do was sustain it. The distance from Greenland was immense, making resupply and reinforcement nearly impossible. And unlike Iceland, which was uninhabited, North America had a large native population that was not going to simply give up their land. The Viking settlement in America failed not because of a lack of courage or skill, but because of the simple, hard realities of logistics and demographics. Number 6, a man's nickname could define his entire life. The saga of Hrafnkell Freysgodi is a masterpiece of storytelling. It's short, focused, and psychologically deep. It tells the story of a chieftain in eastern Iceland named Hrafnkell, and it shows how a single oath, a single act of pride, can lead to a man's complete ruin and eventual transformation. A central element of his story is his relationship with his horse, Freyfaxi. Hrafnkell is a powerful man. He is a Godi, a priest of the god Frey. He builds a large temple to Frey and is very devout. He has a favorite horse, a fine stallion that he names Freyfaxi. He dedicates the horse to his patron god, Frey. He loves this horse so much that he swears a solemn oath. He promises that he will kill any man who rides Freyfaxi without his permission. This oath is not a casual threat. It is a public declaration, a matter of honor. Everyone in the district knows about Hrafnkell and his horse. It becomes part of his identity. He is Hrafnkell Freysgodi, the priest of Frey, the man with the sacred horse. A young man named Einar comes to work for Hrafnkell as a shepherd. Hrafnkell warns him explicitly, do whatever you need to do, take any horse you want, but never ever ride Freyfaxi. Einar promises, but one day some of the sheep go missing. Einar is in a panic. He needs a horse that is fast enough to round them up. The only horse available is Freyfaxi. Einar hesitates, but he is desperate. He decides to take the horse. He finds the sheep, but on the way back, Freyfaxi rolls in the mud, getting dirty. When Hrafnkell sees the horse, he knows immediately what has happened. He is bound by his oath. He confronts Einar. Einar apologizes and explains the situation. Hrafnkell says he would have forgiven many other offenses, but his oath is absolute. He kills Einar. This act sets the story in motion. Einar's father, a poor old man, wants justice. He goes to his relative, Sam, for help. Sam is not a powerful chieftain. He is a farmer, but he is a clever and persistent man. He agrees to take up the case against the powerful Hrafnkell. Everyone expects Sam to fail. Hrafnkell is too powerful. At the Elthing, Hrafnkell intimidates potential supporters, and the case seems hopeless. But through a combination of legal trickery and surprise help from other chieftains who dislike Hrafnkell's arrogance, Sam wins. The court convicts Hrafnkell. He is sentenced to full outlawry. Sam and his allies go to Hrafnkell's farm to carry out the sentence. They don't kill him. Instead, they offer him a choice die, or be stripped of his chieftaincy, his farm, and all his wealth, and leave the district. Hrafnkell, humbled, chooses to live. As a final act of humiliation, they take his horse Freyfaxi, put a bag over its head, and push it off a cliff into a waterfall. They also burn his temple to Frey. Hrafnkell says that he no longer believes in the gods. Hrafnkell moves to another valley. He starts over from nothing. He works hard. He is no longer the arrogant, oath-bound chieftain. he becomes a more reasonable, pragmatic man. He treats his new neighbors with respect. He becomes popular and wealthy again, but through hard work and good character, not through bullying. The saga shows the immense power of an oath and the unforgiving nature of honor in this society. Ralph Penkel's identity was so tied up with his role as Frey's priest and the owner of Freyfaxi that he was forced into an act that destroyed him. But the story is also about second chances. His humiliation forces him to change. He loses everything, including his faith, but he finds a new, more balanced way to live. It's a profound story about how a man's identity can be both a source of strength and a self-made trap. Number 5, a community could form outside the law. Hardar Saga, okay, Holmveria, the Saga of Horde, and the people of the Islet tells a remarkable story about a band of outlaws who create their own society. It's set in Western Iceland in the 10th century. The main character, Hord Grimkelson, is a young man from a good family. But due to a series of escalating conflicts and a bit of bad luck, he kills a man and is outlawed. Instead of fleeing Iceland or trying to survive alone in the wilderness like Grettir, Hord does something different. He gathers other outlaws, vagrants, and landless men. They find a small, defensible island, or islet Holmer, in the Valfjordur Fjord. There, they establish a community. It's a society of the dispossessed, a group of people who have been cast out by the legal society of the Icelandic Commonwealth. This outlaw community, known as the Holmverjar, builds its own rules. Hord is their leader, their chieftain. The saga says there were about 60 people in their group. They live by raiding the farms on the mainland. They are pirates on land. They steal food, livestock, and other goods to support themselves. For the farmers and chieftains of the region, they are a menace. But the saga doesn't portray them as simple villains. It shows their community from the inside. They have a code of honor. They share their loot. They are loyal to each other. Hord is a fair and respected leader. His wife Helga is a strong and influential figure in the community. They have a child on the islet. They are trying to build a life for themselves, even if it is outside the law. The saga highlights the tension between the established society and this outlaw microcosm. The local chieftains see the Holmverjar as a threat to order and property. They mount several expeditions to try and wipe them out. But the islet is well fortified, and the outlaws are desperate fighters. They manage to hold off the attacks. The story of the Holmverjar is a story of a failed state within a state. It shows what happens to people who are pushed to the margins. They don't just disappear, they form their own social structures. Hord's community is a mirror image of the larger society that rejected them. It has a leader, a code of conduct, and a sense of shared identity. Ultimately, the outlaw society cannot last. It is too small, too dependent on raiding. It cannot exist in peace with its neighbors. The saga ends tragically. The chieftains of the mainland eventually manage to trick their way onto the island. In the final battle, Hord and most of his followers are killed. The community is destroyed. Hardar Saga gives us a unique perspective. The other sagas are mostly told from the point of view of the land-owning farmers and chieftains, the insiders. This saga gives a voice to the outsiders. It shows that the line between a lawful chieftain and an outlaw leader could sometimes be thin. Or it was a matter of perspective. For the people on the islet, Hord was a hero, a provider, a king. For the people on the mainland, he was a thief and a killer. The saga reveals that even in a society as obsessed with law as Iceland, there were spaces where the law did not reach, and where people created their own order. Number 4, Christianity's arrival was not a simple conversion. The saga of the people of Losavaten, or Losvetninga saga, deals with the political and social turmoil in Iceland following the official conversion to Christianity around the year 1000. It's a complex story of political maneuvering, focusing on the powerful chieftain Gudmundur the Mighty. It shows that the change of religion was not a sudden spiritual awakening for everyone. It was a political event that created new power dynamics and new ways for chieftains to compete with each other. The saga is set in the Age of Jordur district of northern Iceland. The conversion to Christianity at the Althing was a political compromise to avoid a civil war, but it didn't magically erase 1,000 years of pagan belief and culture. On a local level, the transition was messy. Gudmundur the Mighty is a classic Icelandic chieftain. He is powerful, ambitious, and obsessed with his own honor and influence. The saga shows how he uses the new religion as a tool in his political games. The issue of building churches becomes a new source of conflict. Who gets to build a church on their land? Who controls the church and its wealth? These were not just religious questions. They were questions of power. A chieftain who built and controlled a church on his land gained prestige and a new source of income. The saga details a long and complicated feud between Gudmundur and another chieftain. The conflict plays out through legal battles at the local assembly and the Althing. But it also involves things like one chieftain trying to take control of a church that another one. The language of the disputes changes. Instead of arguing about pagan temples, they are now arguing about Christian churches. But the underlying motivation is the same: the struggle for power and dominance. The saga also shows the lingering influence of old beliefs. People might be officially Christian, but their worldview is still shaped by the old ways. They still believe in fate. They are still obsessed with honor, vengeance, and family loyalty. The new religion is like a layer of paint on top of an old, sturdy structure. The structure itself hasn't really changed. One episode shows this clearly. A man is killed. His brother wants to follow the new Christian teaching of forgiveness, but his mother mocks him. She tells him he is a coward. She pushes him to follow the old way, the way of blood vengeance. The social pressure to uphold family honor was often stronger than the new religious doctrine. The Osvetninga saga reveals that the conversion of Iceland was a long, slow process. The official decision in the year 1000 was just the beginning. For generations afterwards, Icelanders wrestled with the implications of the new faith. It became entangled with the existing political system of chieftains, feuds, and legal battles. For ambitious men like Gudmundur the Mighty, Christianity wasn't just a path to salvation. It was another arena for competition, another way to gain an edge over his rivals. The saga tells the forgotten truth that a change in national religion doesn't immediately change the hearts and habits of a people. Number 3, a father's curse could be a real and terrible thing. Egil's saga is one of the most famous and celebrated of all the Icelandic sagas. It tells the life story of Egil Skallagrimsson, a 10th century Viking farmer, and most importantly, one of the greatest poets of the Old Norse world. Egil was a man of contradictions, a violent killer and a sensitive poet, a greedy brute, and a loving father. The saga, likely written by Snorri Sturluson in the 13th century, delves deep into the psychology of this complex man and his family. And it reveals a profound belief in the power of inherited traits and the inescapable nature of family destiny, almost like a form of genetic determinism. The story begins with Egil's grandfather, Kveldalfur Evening Wolf, in Norway. Kveldalfur is a powerful landowner, but he has a strange trait. Most of the day he is a normal man, but in the evenings he becomes sullen, withdrawn, and dangerous. He is a hamrammer, a shapeshifter, though perhaps more in temperament than in a literal sense. This duality, a mix of the calm and the uncontrollably fierce, is a trait passed down his family line. Kveldalfur has 2 sons. The older son, Thorolf, is handsome, charming, and popular, taking after his mother's side of the family. The younger son, Skallagrimur Baldgrim, is ugly, dark, and shares his father's difficult evening temperament. The family comes into conflict with King Harald Fairhair of Norway. The king, jealous of Thorolf's success, has him killed. In a rage, Skallagrimur and his father Kveldulf take revenge on the king's men, and then flee to Iceland. In Iceland, Skallagrimur establishes a farm at Borg. He has 2 sons. The older, also named Thorolf, is handsome and promising like his uncle. The younger son is Egil. Egil is the spitting image of his father Ugly from a young age, with a large head and a powerful build. He also inherits the family's difficult temperament. He is precocious, composing his first poem at the age of 3 and committing his first killing at the age of 7. The saga follows Egil's long and violent life. He travels throughout the Viking world, from Scandinavia to England. He fights as a mercenary for the English king Athelstan at the Battle of Brunanburh in 937. He gets into feuds with kings and chieftains, including King Eric Bloodaxe of Norway. He is often motivated by greed or slighted honor, and he kills dozens of men throughout his life. But Egil is also a master poet. When he is captured by King Eric and sentenced to death, he saves his own life by composing a magnificent poem of praise for the king overnight. This poem, the Hofudlausenhead Ransom, is a stunning display of complex skaldic craft. This is the core contradiction of Egil. His hands are covered in blood, but his mind can produce poetry of incredible beauty and technical skill. The theme of inherited fate climaxes late in Egil's life. He has a favorite son, Bodvar, who drowns in a storm. Egil is so overwhelmed with grief that he locks himself in his bed closet, refusing to eat or drink, determined to die. His daughter, Thorgerd, tricks him into drinking milk and then convinces him to channel his grief into a poem. Egil composes the Sonatorek, the loss of a son, a heartbreaking and powerful poem about his loss, his anger at the god Odin, and his eventual acceptance. The poem saves him from his grief. Egil's saga shows that for the Norse, family was fate. The traits of the ancestors, their strengths, and their fatal flaws were passed down through the blood. Egil is ugly, violent, and brilliant because his father and grandfather were. He cannot escape his inheritance. His life is a constant struggle between the dark, brutish side of his nature and his incredible artistic intellect. The saga is a deep psychological portrait of a man at war with himself, a man defined by the legacy of his ancestors. Number 2, a Viking hero could be a Christian saint. The Orkneyinga saga is not an Icelandic saga. It's a history of the Earls of Orkney, the islands north of Scotland, from the 9th century to the 13th. The islands were a Norse earldom, a powerful Viking state on the edge of Europe. The saga is full of politics, family feuds, and Viking raids. But it also tells a very different kind of story, one that challenges our image of a Viking leader. It tells the story of Saint Magnus the Martyr. Magnus Erlendsson was a joint Earl of Orkney in the early 12th century. He ruled alongside his cousin, Hakon Paulson. This joint rule was a recipe for trouble. The two earls had different personalities and different groups of supporters, and tensions grew between them. Magnus was a very unusual Viking earl. The saga describes him as a pious and gentle man. He was a devout Christian. When he was forced to take part in a Viking raid on Wales, the saga says he refused to fight. He stayed on the ship and sang psalms during the battle. This was not typical behavior for a Norse leader. His men were likely confused, if not disgusted. A leader was supposed to lead in battle, to be a warrior. And Hakon, on the other hand, was a more traditional Norse earl. He was ambitious, ruthless, and wanted to rule Orkney by himself. The conflict between the two cousins grew until civil war seemed inevitable. To avoid a war, the two earls agreed to meet on the small island of Egilsay during Easter in the year 1117. They were supposed to bring only 2 ships each and negotiate a peace treaty. Magnus kept his word. He arrived with 2 ships and his men. He spent the night before the meeting in prayer in the island's church. Hakon did not keep his word. He arrived with 8 ships full of armed warriors. Magnus saw that he had been betrayed. He knew he was going to die. The saga says he was offered a chance to save himself. His men wanted to fight. He refused, saying he would not shed blood during the holy season of Easter. He was also offered exile or imprisonment. He refused those offers too, saying he would accept whatever God had planned for him. Hakon's chieftains demanded that one of the earls had to die to settle the issue for good. Hakon ordered his standard-bearer to execute Magnus. The standard-bearer refused. In the end, Hakon forced his cook, Leifalf, to do the job. The saga describes Magnus forgiving his killers before Leifalf struck him in the head with an axe. After his death, miracles began to be reported at Magnus's grave. People claimed they were healed of sickness. He quickly became revered as a saint. His nephew Rongvald eventually became Earl and built a magnificent cathedral in Kirkwall, the capital of Orkney, in his uncle's honor. The St. Magnus Cathedral still stands today. Magnus was formally canonized by the Pope in 1135. The story of St. Magnus in the Orkneyinga saga is a powerful example of the changing values in the late Viking Age. It shows the collision of the old Viking warrior ethos and the new Christian ideals of peace, piety, and martyrdom. Magnus was a new kind of hero. His greatness was not measured by his skill in battle or the number of enemies he killed. It was measured by his faith and his willingness to sacrifice himself for peace. This saga tells the forgotten truth that the Viking world was not monolithic. It was a place of deep and complex change where a peaceful Christian martyr could become one of its most celebrated figures. Number 1, Iceland was founded by people fleeing a tyrant. The Landnámabók, or the Book of Settlements, is not a saga in the traditional sense. It has no single plot or hero. It is a detailed historical record. It lists the names of the original Norse settlers of Iceland, about 430 of them. It describes where they settled, who their ancestors were, and who their descendants were. It is one of the most important documents in Icelandic history. And it gives a clear reason for why all these people left their homes in Norway to sail to a cold volcanic island in the middle of the Atlantic. They were fleeing a king. The book begins its account in the late 9th century. In Norway, King Harald Fairhair was engaged in a long and bloody campaign to unify the country under his rule. Before Harald, Norway was a collection of small, independent, petty kingdoms and chieftaincies. Harald was changing that. He was using military force to create a single, centralized kingdom. For many of the Norwegian chieftains and powerful free farmers, this was an unacceptable change. They were used to their independence, they answered to no king, they governed their own affairs. King Harald was demanding that they submit to his authority. He was imposing taxes. He was confiscating land from those who opposed him. He was fundamentally altering their way of life. The Landnámabók presents the settlement of Iceland as a direct response to this. It was a political act. The first settler mentioned is Ingolfur Arnarson. He had a dispute with a local earl in Norway and decided to leave rather than submit. He sailed west and, according to the book, founded Reykjavik around the year 874. After him came a wave of others. The book lists them, one by one. Men and women from powerful families in Norway. They packed up their households, their children, their livestock, and their followers, and set sail in their longships. They were political refugees. They were choosing exile over submission. The book describes how they found and claimed their land. A settler would sail along the coast until he found a suitable fjord or valley. He would then perform a ritual to claim the land, a landnam. This often involved walking the boundaries of the land with a fire, or throwing his high seat pillars, the wooden posts from his chieftain's chair, overboard and settling wherever they washed ashore. Ingolfur Arnarson did this. The Landnámabók shows that Iceland was founded on an idea. It was an attempt to recreate the old, free society that was being destroyed in Norway. In Iceland, there would be no king. The settlers established a new form of government, a commonwealth of free farmers. The ultimate authority was the law, and the law was made by an assembly of chieftains, the Althing, founded in 930. It was a radical political experiment. The truth told by the Landnámabók is that the Viking Age was not just driven by a thirst for plunder or new farmland. It was also driven by politics. The settlement of Iceland was a deliberate, conscious choice by a group of people who valued their freedom above everything else. They were willing to brave the dangerous North Atlantic and start a new life in a harsh, unknown land in order to escape what they saw as the tyranny of a king. The entire Icelandic nation was born from this act of defiance.